The slap echoed through the quiet cafe like a gunshot, snapping every head toward the corner table where a single father sat frozen, his young daughter staring up at him with wide, frightened eyes. Coffee spilled through the air in a golden arc, cups shattering against the tiled floor as laughter and gasps tangled together in confusion. For one suspended heartbeat, it looked like just another cruel moment in a world that had grown used to looking away. But this time, the man who had been humiliated in front of his child was not who anyone thought he was. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in standing up for those who can't defend themselves, take a moment right now to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this matter because they remind us who we can choose to be. The cafe sat on a busy downtown corner, warm with the smell of roasted beans and fresh bread. It was the kind of place where students typed on laptops and older couples lingered over tea. Ethan Cole came there every Thursday evening with his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. It was their ritual. One pastry to share, 2 hot chocolates, and an hour of homework before heading home to their small apartment on the edge of the city. Ethan was not the kind of man who drew attention. He wore simple clothes, often faded jeans, and a worn leather jacket that had seen too many winters. His hands were rough, knuckles thick with old scars that told stories no one in the cafe could read. His eyes, however, carried something heavier than exhaustion. They carried distance. The kind of distance that forms when a man has seen too much and learned to fold it neatly into silence. Since his wife had passed away 3 years earlier after a sudden illness, Ethan's world had shrunk to the size of Lily's hand in his. He worked construction during the day, sometimes double shifts to keep the lights on. At night, he helped with spelling tests and braided her hair with clumsy determination. He missed parent-teacher meetings occasionally, forgot to sign forms, and burned dinner more times than he could count, but he never missed Thursday cafe nights. It was their island of normalcy in a storm that never quite settled. On that evening, Lily had been laughing over a math problem when a group of men in tailored suits entered the cafe, loud and energized, carrying the sharp scent of expensive cologne and entitlement. They were celebrating something, perhaps a deal closed or a promotion earned. Among them was a broad-shouldered man named Grant Holloway, a local real estate developer known for buying entire neighborhoods and reshaping them without looking back. Grant had the kind of presence that demanded space. He scanned the cafe with a bored expression, as though judging its worth. When he noticed Ethan's worn jacket draped over the back of the chair and Lily's backpack on the floor near his polished shoes, something in his face twisted with irritation. It happened quickly. Grant nudged the backpack aside with his foot, muttering something about clutter. Lily immediately bent to retrieve it, apologizing softly even though she had done nothing wrong. Ethan stood halfway, instinctively protective, and that was when Grant's irritation flared into something uglier. Words were exchanged, sharp and dismissive. Ethan remained calm, choosing restraint over pride. He asked only that the man be careful, that there was a child involved. The crack of skin against skin silenced the cafe. Coffee flew from Ethan's cup, splashing across his own cheek and onto Lily's sweater. Cups crashed to the floor. Lily gasped, her small hands trembling as she looked at her father, waiting for him to explode or crumble full. Instead, Ethan remained seated, eyes closed for a brief moment as if measuring something invisible. He slowly wiped the coffee from his face and looked at his daughter first, not at the man who had struck him. His expression softened with a reassurance that seemed almost impossible under the circumstances. Grant mistook that restraint for weakness. He leaned closer, his voice rising, belittling the quiet father in front of his peers. Around them, phones began to lift discreetly. The world loved humiliation when it was packaged as spectacle. What no one in that cafe knew was that Ethan Cole had once moved through deserts and mountains under a different name. Years earlier, he had served in one of the most elite special operations units in the world. He had endured training that broke stronger men. He had learned discipline that carved patience into his bones. He had operated in silence where mistakes meant death. He had seen friends fall and carried their memories home like invisible medals. But when his wife became sick, Ethan had chosen to leave that life behind. He had traded classified missions for construction sites, night raids for bedtime stories. He had promised himself that his daughter would never grow up knowing the violence that once defined him. As Grant continued to taunt him, Ethan felt the old instincts stir beneath his calm exterior. His body remembered angles and leverage, remembered how to end a confrontation in seconds. The cafe's layout registered in his mind automatically: exits, obstacles, distances. It would take less than 3 movements to neutralize the threat, less than 5 seconds to silence the laughter. But then he felt Lily's small hand clutch his sleeve. That touch anchored him more firmly than any training ever had. Ethan rose slowly, not in aggression but in quiet authority. His posture shifted almost imperceptibly, shoulders squared, chin lifted. The room felt the change before it understood it. Grant stepped forward again, perhaps to push him or provoke him further, but something in Ethan's eyes made him hesitate. In that gaze was not anger, it was control. It was the kind of stillness that exists before a storm chooses not to break. Ethan did not strike back. Instead, he placed himself between Grant and his daughter and spoke calmly, his voice low and steady. He said enough for Grant to understand that he was not a man to be toyed with. He mentioned years of service, deployments that were never reported on the news, brothers lost in places without names. He did not boast. He simply stated facts, the way a man might list previous jobs on a resume. Grant laughed again, at first dismissive, but the laughter faltered when Ethan described specific units, operations, and the discipline drilled into soldiers who specialized in ending conflicts swiftly. One of Grant's friends, pale now, recognized the significance of what was being implied. The term Delta Force was not spoken loudly, but it carried weight when it left Ethan's lips. The atmosphere shifted. The same crowd that had been hungry for entertainment now sensed the gravity beneath the surface. Grant's confidence thinned. He saw, perhaps for the first time, that the man he had struck was not fragile. He was contained. Ethan made it clear that he would not retaliate. He would not escalate. He had promised himself that violence would no longer be his first language. But he also made it clear that if his daughter was threatened again, restraint would no longer be an option. The message settled heavily in the air. Grant's friends began urging him toward the door, their earlier bravado dissolving into awkward tension. The developer who had entered the cafe like a king left it with shoulders slightly lowered, aware that he had misjudged a man based on clothing and silence. As the door closed behind them, the cafe exhaled collectively. The staff rushed forward with napkins and apologies, offering free drinks, trying to restore normalcy. Ethan thanked them politely but declined anything extra. He knelt in front of Lily, brushing coffee from her sweater, checking her hands for cuts from the shattered porcelain. She looked at him with confusion and awe. She had seen her father humiliated and then transformed without raising a fist. In her young mind, strength had just taken on a new meaning. That night, back in their apartment, Lily asked about the scars on his hands. Ethan sat beside her on the couch and, for the first time, told her pieces of his past. He spoke not of combat in detail, but of loyalty, discipline, and the importance of protecting others. He explained that real strength was knowing when not to fight. The incident at the cafe spread quickly online. Someone had recorded the confrontation and uploaded it. The clip showed the slap, the spilled coffee, and then Ethan's composed response. Viewers were divided at first, some praising his restraint, others wishing he had retaliated. But as more context emerged about his background and his life as a single father, admiration replaced criticism. Unexpectedly, the video reached Grant as well. He watched it alone late at night, replaying the moment his hand had struck a man who had chosen mercy over revenge. For the first time in years, embarrassment felt different. It felt deserved. Days later, Grant returned to the cafe alone. Ethan was there again with Lily, as if nothing had happened. The ritual continued. Grant approached cautiously, without his entourage, without the armor of laughter. He apologized, not for the cameras, not for reputation, but because something in him had been unsettled. Seeing a father choose dignity over dominance had forced him to confront his own reflection. Ethan listened. He did not rush forgiveness, but he did not withhold it either. He accepted the apology on one condition: that Grant consider how easily power can become cruelty when left unchecked. Grant nodded, understanding perhaps for the first time that influence carries responsibility. Over the following months, small changes rippled outward. Grant quietly funded renovations in the neighborhood without displacing residents. He supported local businesses instead of replacing them. The cafe owner later mentioned that the developer had invested in community programs anonymously. Ethan never sought recognition. He continued waking before dawn, packing lunches, tying shoelaces, but something had shifted in Lily. She walked taller at school, telling her friends that her dad was brave, not because he fought, but because he didn't have to. The true victory had not been physical, it had been moral. A slap meant to humiliate had become a lesson in restraint, humility, and redemption. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in quiet strength, and subscribe so we can continue sharing stories that matter. Before you reach the final lines, I have a special request for you. Comment the word strength below if you believe that true power lies in self-control and compassion. In a world quick to record conflict but slow to celebrate mercy, Ethan Cole stood as a reminder that the greatest warriors are often the ones who choose peace. His past had shaped him, but it did not own him. He carried it like a shadow, present but no longer leading. The cafe returned to its usual rhythm. Students typed, couples sipped tea, and every Thursday, a single father and his daughter shared a pastry at the corner table. The memory of that slap faded into something quieter, almost sacred, a moment when anger met discipline and discipline prevailed. And somewhere in the city, a man who once mistook dominance for strength learned that respect cannot be demanded through fear. It is earned through humility, earned through humility. Ethan never wore medals on his jacket. He wore something far heavier and far more beautiful, the trust of his daughter and the knowledge that when tested, he had chosen the path that would let her sleep peacefully at night. If this story moved you even a little, don't scroll away without letting us know. Your engagement keeps these stories alive and reminds others that kindness still matters. Because sometimes the loudest victories are the ones where no punch is thrown, no revenge is taken, and a child learns that her hero is not the man who hits back, but the man who stands tall, steady, and kind in the face of cruelty. The days after the incident at the cafe should have returned quietly to routine, but life rarely settles so easily after something shifts beneath the surface. What began as a single humiliating slap had already changed more than one heart. Yet the true test of Ethan Cole's strength was still waiting, hidden in consequences no one could have predicted. The video continued spreading online, far beyond their city. Millions watched the clip of a single father absorbing a public humiliation without striking back. Comment sections filled with debate. Some called him a coward before learning who he was. Others called him a hero the moment they understood what he had chosen not to do. But attention is a double-edged sword. One evening, Ethan's construction supervisor called him into the office. There had been complaints. Some clients felt uncomfortable knowing a former special operations soldier worked on their properties. It sounded absurd, almost laughable, but fear often wears a suit and speaks politely. The company didn't want controversy. They suggested a temporary leave. Ethan listened calmly, nodded once, and packed his tools into the back of his old truck. He had survived far worse than unemployment, but as he drove home, the weight of providing for Lily pressed against his ribs harder than any battlefield memory ever had. Bills did not care about dignity. Rent did not wait for moral victories. At home, Lily noticed the difference immediately. Children sensed tension the way sailors sense changing winds. That night, Ethan burned dinner again, staring too long at nothing. Lily quietly brought her math homework to the kitchen table and sat beside him without speaking. After a few minutes, she placed her small hand over his scarred knuckles. He smiled at her, but his eyes carried worry. The following week tested him more than the cafe ever had. Job interviews came and went. Some employers were intimidated by his background. Others assumed he would be aggressive. A few even suggested that someone with his training might struggle in normal environments. The irony almost made him laugh. If only they knew how normalcy was the hardest thing he had ever fought for. Meanwhile, whispers followed Lily at school. Children repeated what they heard at home. Some exaggerated the story, claiming her father had nearly beaten a man to death. Others said he was dangerous. Lily came home quieter each day, her shoulders slightly lower. One afternoon, Ethan found her sitting on the edge of her bed, holding the small wooden box where he kept a few medals tucked away. She had opened it for the first time. The metal caught the afternoon light, glinting softly. She looked up at him and asked if being brave always meant losing something first. The question struck deeper than any insult. Ethan sat beside her and explained that bravery often costs comfort, sometimes even security, but it protects something far more valuable in the long run. He told her that strength is not about winning every fight. It is about knowing which fights are worth your soul. Still, as rent approached and savings dwindled, doubt crept in during the quiet hours of night. He had walked away from a career that offered structure and purpose to be present for his daughter. He had chosen restraint in the café. He had chosen forgiveness when apology came. Yet the world seemed determined to test whether those choices would hold. Then, unexpectedly, a letter arrived. It was from a veterans outreach organization that had seen the viral clip. They offered him a leadership role mentoring returning service members who struggled to reintegrate into civilian life. They had watched how he handled public humiliation, how he carried himself without arrogance, and believed that kind of example was rare. Ethan hesitated at first. He had avoided anything that tied him back to his former world. But this was different. This wasn't combat. It was guidance. It was helping men and women find their footing again. He accepted. The work was not easy. He met soldiers haunted by noise only they could hear. Some were angry, some were numb. Ethan did not lecture them. He listened. He shared pieces of his own struggle, how he once believed violence defined him, and how fatherhood had reshaped his understanding of purpose. Slowly, something healed in him as he helped others heal. Lily noticed the change. The heaviness in his shoulders eased. The quiet no longer felt burdened but steady again. One evening, as they walked to the cafe for their Thursday ritual, the owner greeted Ethan warmly. Business had actually increased since the incident. People came not for drama, but for inspiration. The cafe had become a small symbol of something better. Inside, at the same corner table, Lily opened her notebook and began writing an essay for school titled, "Ah, My Hero." Ethan pretended not to watch, sipping his coffee carefully this time. Across the room, a familiar figure stepped inside. Grant Holloway paused at the door, scanning the space. But this time he carried no entourage, no loud laughter. He approached their table with measured steps. He told Ethan that after their last conversation, he had made changes in his company. He had established scholarships for children of veterans. He had partnered with local community groups instead of forcing them out. He admitted that the slap had been less about Ethan and more about his own unchecked ego. He then did something unexpected. He asked Lily if she would accept a small donation to her school's library in her name as a reminder that kindness creates ripples. Lily looked at her father before answering. Ethan nodded slightly, letting her choose. She agreed, but only if the donation included books about empathy and leadership. Grant smiled, perhaps humbled for the first time in years. As he left, the cafe felt different again, not tense but reflective. Ethan realized that restraint had not only protected his daughter that day, it had planted a seed in someone who needed to be confronted without violence. Months passed. The Veterans Mentorship Program flourished under Ethan's guidance. He helped dozens transition into new careers. He reminded them that their past skills could serve communities rather than destroy threats. He became known not as a former Delta operator, but as a patient leader. One afternoon, Lily's school held an assembly about role models. To Ethan's surprise, he was invited to speak. Standing at the podium in a simple button-down shirt, he looked out at rows of children and parents. He spoke not about combat, not about missions, but about choices. He told them that every person carries power, whether physical, financial, or social. The real measure of character is how that power is used. When he finished, the applause was not thunderous, but it was sincere. After the assembly, Lily ran into his arms and whispered that he didn't just protect her in the cafe. He showed her what kind of person she wanted to become. The words settled into his heart like sunlight after a long winter. Life never became perfect. Bills still needed paying. Or days still arrived unannounced. But Ethan no longer questioned whether choosing restraint had been worth it. He saw the answer in Lily's confidence, in the veterans rebuilding their lives, and the developer who had learned humility. The slap that once echoed like humiliation had transformed into something else entirely. It became a turning point not just for one man, but for a small community. And now, as this chapter closes, I want to ask you something from the heart. If this continuation of Ethan and Lily's journey touched you, if it reminded you that strength is more than fists and power is more than pride, take a moment to engage with this story. Like the video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe so we can continue bringing you stories that inspire courage and compassion. Before you go, leave a comment telling us what true strength means to you. Your words might inspire someone reading through them tonight. Because in the end, heroes are not defined by the battles they win, but by the violence they refuse to unleash. And sometimes the greatest legacy a father can leave his child is not tales of war, but proof that even the strongest hands can choose to remain open.